name is María Teresa Kumar, and you are joining us as part of Voto Latino's voting series. I can't believe that we are definitely at the home stretch, and I couldn't imagine a better conversation than talking to two El Paso Texans right now, given how much the front and center Texas all of a sudden has found itself in. I will share with you that I'm really, really excited to welcome Representative Mary Gonzalez. She represents the House District 75 in El Paso County, and also Noel Candelaria, Secretary Treasurer of the National Education Association. And today we're going to be talking about what's on the line when it comes to education and the Latino community. I can't imagine a better time as a parent myself. I am trying to home Zoom my kids, and it has been an interesting, engaging, and interesting experience, I think, for everybody, for students, for parents, for teachers, and educators. And so I think that also talks a little bit about the discrepancies we have. So I'm very excited to bring you into this conversation, both of you. And, you know, Voto Latino, we deeply believe in the work that each of you do. We deeply believe in Texas. We have now registered, as of January 1, we have registered over 250,000 Texans, and many of them are in El Paso. And we are going to be mobilizing 1.5 million Texans this year, because we know that the stakes couldn't be higher. So welcome both of you to the conversation.
Thank you for having us. I'm really excited about this conversation. And you're right, super timely. So many things happening in El Paso, in the state of Texas, and across the country.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to, reiterate that point. I mean, Texas is just always exciting. And right now during this election, and seeing the record turnouts and seeing the Latino community coming out just excites us even more. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
No, so before I get started, how is everybody doing? I know that El Paso was recently named a hotspot. Mary, how are you and your family handling it?
I'm very fortunate that I actually live in the country part of El Paso, so there's more cows and horses around me than there are people. But, I will say that it's a hard time for El Paso. And, the coronavirus is real, and it is hitting our community in ways that are very dangerous. Well, the beautiful thing about our community is we're multi-generational, meaning our tias live with our cousins still and our abuelitas, and that's beautiful about us. But it also puts our community at a higher risk, and we're feeling that risk right now. And so we'll be taking some swift action, and it is necessary in order to keep our people literally alive.
Yeah, and then for me, I mean, thankfully, our family has been relatively safe. My nephew just, and his family, he plays football at Franklin High School. So he just tested positive. So, we're keeping them in our thoughts and prayers. Like Mary said, we're multi-generational. I live in Austin right now because I just finished my term as the president of the Texas State Teachers Association.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm in constant contact with my parents and my grandmother, who's 89, that lives with my parents, trying to make sure that they're safe, because we know how susceptible the elderly are. And so, I'm just in constant communication with our friends and family back home, and just, urging them to stay safe, wear a mask, just follow, the basic things that we're supposed to do to keep each other safe, because, the way we love each other as a community is by doing those simple things that are not just going to keep us safe, but keep our neighbors safe. And so, it's tough right now in El Paso.
No, and I am with you in so many ways. We have a Voto Latino team that lives there, but I have also relatives that live there. I've spent a lot of time in El Paso. And so before we get started, I want to just have you just briefly explain what the NEA is. One of the things that we have found through our Voto Latino audience is that oftentimes they're not familiar with what unions do. And so I just want to give you if you can just give a brief description of what the NEA does, and then we can dive in. Representative Gonzalez, with more of your own personal career, like how you got here. You were one of the youngest ever elected, and then we can go from there. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Noel, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I'm proud to be the Secretary Treasurer of the largest labor union in the nation. We have 3 million members. That means that 1 out of every 100 Americans is a member of the National Education Association. We have members in every congressional district in the country, and 1 out of every 35 households will be connected. A voting household will be connected to an NEA member. So we represent educators across the entire nation. in all 50 states. Plus, we also have educators serving in our military bases overseas that we represent through the Federal Education Association. That ranges from our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers, our teachers, counselors, nurses. We also have public service employees that are part of our union. So it's a very diverse union that is very representative of who we are as a nation, that is on the front lines of fighting for education equity for all students, in the country. Especially, we've taken on since 2015, what's been really a central focus for us as a union, working with all of our state and local affiliates, is the issue around racial equity and systemic racism, and the impact that it has in our schools for our students, and what we need to do in order to dismantle systemic racism, so that our students have the resources that they need to succeed and fulfill their potential. Because our mission is very clear: a great public school for every student.
And we'll jump into that, Noel. And I think that's great. I think we'll jump into those racial inequities, because I think it's what brings us into this conversation. And so we have plenty of questions to dive into that. What I'd like from you, Mary, is that you have been such a representative and a champion of Latino issues. Just from our audience that's tuning in, hearing your story for the very first time, you jumped into the throes of political life at 28. Talk a little bit about what inspired you and how a young person can get civically involved now. And then let's get into the heart of why we're here, which is all about education.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I look up to you so much, Maria Teresa and Noel. You're such a great leader in our country, and you're from El Paso. But you're right. If you would have told me 10 years ago that I'd be a state rep, I would have never believed you. It was never in my plan. I was a professor finishing a PhD. And so here's what I will say. Here's what I realized when I walked on the House floor: that we need greater diversity and representation. And so if you're asking young people right now, what can they do? Get involved in politics. I started working at the Capitol as an intern, and that's what led me here. And because right now is when we need your voice to be represented. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And right now, because of everything that's going on, there are a lot of things on the menu. So we need to be fierce advocates more than ever before. So I'm really excited to be here. For those of you who don't know me, proud to represent El Paso, and look me up online, because I feel like my bio is way too long, but I'm super happy to be here.
It absolutely is, but it's because you have been fierce. And I love this fact that you were a professor at 28. You're like, well, I was just a professor at 28. So let's get into the conversation. So
I was an assistant dean at 26. I mean, I've lived a whole life. I lived a whole life.
So you have probably 4 or 5 other careers ahead of you, Mary. So Noel, talk to me a little bit about why is education so important, and how do you connect it to voting?
I mean, education is everything. I mean, I'm a high school special education teacher. I taught at Cesar Chavez Academy there in El Paso, in the Sled Independent School District. When I chose to become a teacher, I wanted to work with the most challenging students in our district, the students that were already on the school to prison pipeline. And so when I think about education and voting, they go hand in hand, because education is the foundation of our democracy. Without a strong public school system, we don't have an educated citizenry. And so, especially right, I see how it just, even in today's time with the whole issue of the fake news and, attacking the media, and how important it is for our students to be educated on being able to tell the difference between a peer-reviewed, story, right? Or a story that has peer-reviewed information, information that we know is valid, that can be backed up by facts and data. And so, I mean, to me, it's foundational, especially in the Latino community, because education opens so many doors and so many doors of opportunity. And when we're able to invest in our students, we're able to invest in our children, especially our marginalized communities. I mean, communities that have been, for decades ignored. We lift up entire communities and the entire nation. And so for me, tying a strong public school system to the success of democracy go hand in hand. We can't have one without the other. And that's why, that's why I stepped into the role of advocacy for my students and my colleagues, because I knew what education did for me in my life. And what it can do to change the life and the projection for generations of families in our communities. And so for me, that's why I do what I do, because I've always been involved from day one in the politics of education, in the policy of education, because that is where we begin to identify, the injustices and the systemic racism that's even within our systems, to make sure that there's equity across the board, so that, every child truly has that opportunity to fulfill their future, and is able to be full participants in our society, and be civically engaged and civically involved, which is part of our mission as the NEA.
Mm-hmm. So, Mary, as an elected official in El Paso, how are you tackling COVID-19 in your community?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. So, part of the coronavirus times is that things are actually happening. And so somebody knocked on my door, and now my dogs are like, there's a stranger. But how am I tackling COVID-19? So first of all is what COVID-19 has demonstrated is the inequalities that existed in society are exacerbated. And we've heard that 1,000 times. So for me, it's making sure that those folks who are most marginalized and vulnerable to the impact of coronavirus are being supported and uplifted and helped, right? So whether it's tackling the digital divide, whether it's access to healthcare, testing, all of the above. I mean, I'll give an example. In my district, because I represent 263 colonias, there was an instance where our water system, because our water system sometimes is not as stable, didn't work for 48 hours, right? And then during a coronavirus, when you're supposed to be washing your hands, that was a serious threat to the health of a lot of people. So for me, it's about always looking at where there is folks that could fall through the cracks and making sure those cracks are remedied sooner rather than later.
I think that's super helpful. And one of the things, Noel, that we also know is that there is the way we are reimagining education right now. We probably won't appreciate it until we're after this Zoom moment that I like to call. But how do you think right now, what is the biggest threat to our educational system as it stands?
I mean, I think the biggest threat we see right now is the impact that COVID is having on the profession. We have seen, especially in minority communities, low socioeconomic communities, we've always had a high turnover in those communities, and that's where most often our most inexperienced teachers are placed. And what we're seeing because of this pandemic is we're seeing a lot of experience that is leaving. We're even seeing a lot of younger teachers with young children who are saying, I can't expose my family because there is no plan. And so we've seen the inequities that have been unmasked because of this pandemic. We've always known they were there as teachers, but we've done a good job as a society and systemically to mask them, because our public schools and their physical structures, we provide the internet, we provide the devices, we provide meals for students, we provide transportation. Our teachers do a tremendous job and have always done a tremendous job of digging out of their own pocket to buy supplies and give our students what they need. But when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden every teacher's classroom became a child's home, right? And I mean, our teachers quickly realized the inequities within the system, not just the digital divide and the access to technology and the broadband, but if you have multiple kids living in your household, who gets to be on the internet at any given time because broadband issues. But what our teachers were also seeing is that a lot of homes didn't even have some of the simple supplies like paper, pencil, crayons. So our teachers were quickly putting packets together, going to the store and working with their campuses to try to deliver some of these basic materials for our students, because we've always done a good job of providing them for them at school. So the idea sometimes when we think about we want to get back to normal, well, what we knew before is that normal was not good enough before, so we have to go back better. We've been really adamant as the NEA to push the HEROES Act, because it's providing $175 billion to our schools to help close that digital divide. The state legislature is getting ready to go into session in January. And we are going to have to look at seriously how we look at our tax system to truly provide the funding that is necessary for all of our students.
Yeah, I think that's right, Noel. Yeah, and I think that's right, Noel. And for folks just tuning in to Voto Latino right now, the HEROES Act is basically it's the third package of relief for COVID to go into our communities. It was passed on May 15th by the House, and it is relegated right now at the feet of Mitch McConnell because he says he doesn't have enough time, yet he had enough time to pass a Supreme Court justice for a lifetime appointment in 30 days. So the HEROES Act is not only was to address inequities in education, but also to make sure that our voting system was safe, and the list goes on. So I think this is an opportunity for us to also reimagine what education looks like. Noel and Mary, one thing that you both mentioned and highlighted are the disparities that we see that exist in our communities that no one talks about, but as you mentioned, we know exist. I think that many of you tuning in may have been reminded of these two young girls that are in front of Taco Bell sitting on a stoop because they're getting they're getting Wi-Fi. I mean, and they're two Latinas, right? Two young Latina girls. And so, Mary, I think oftentimes people right now our community in many ways is struggling for real, in the sense that we are 20% of the population, but 35% of the pandemic has hit us disproportionately. And it's easy for us to kind of get back into our shells when we're being hit one thing after another. But I do believe that we have a great opportunity to transform education in so many systems. Talk a little bit about what you think is possible in this moment. What would be the biggest impact of change for education?
Wow, I have been thinking about this question because the coronavirus really gives us a time to reflect. I will say this, the coronavirus, the racial justice movements, the economic realities are really the combination of a time for us to reflect and reassess what we're investing in, how we are structured, and what we need to be doing differently. So it's really one of these critical moments, everything from should we be investing more in police in schools or maybe counselors in schools, considering I saw this really powerful statement from a student in California, and he said, the coronavirus is just so heavy and I feel like I can't talk to my family about it, right? And how sad to hear a student say that and know that there may need help for mental health wraparound services in this moment in time. And so what are we investing in? So what can we be doing? For the first thing I would say is do a mapping of what we want schools and school districts to look like in the next 20 years. And then how do we get there? And maybe how has the coronavirus created opportunities for us to shift the ways we're investing and doing things? And so I will say the Learning Policy Institute released a really fascinating support on coronavirus changes in schools. And it's about restarting public education in a really critical and interesting way, centering racial justice. And so I will say that has been a great tool and technique. But the first thing I will say is right now, policymakers like myself are in charge of very critical decisions that'll impact the next decade of public education. So if people have ideas or needs, those need to be articulated in this moment in time, not necessarily 2 months from now when policy is already moving as legislatures go into their sessions starting in January.
Go ahead.
If I can add to that, I mean, at NEA, we've been really focused on our community schools concept, right? Of what it means to be a true community school where our neighborhood schools are the hub of the community, where we are not only providing, meeting the academic needs, but the emotional, social needs of our students and the community as a whole. We sometimes forget that, a lot of our students, when they go home, they still have, they still need access to resources. Their parents still need access to resources,
right.
And so educating the entire community and how our public schools play a role in providing, job training. I remember growing up as a kid, I used to sit in the teacher's lounge, and Mr. Don Ramon, who was the custodian, while my parents were learning English in the classrooms that I was learning in during the day. Yep. Right. I mean, we don't see much of that anymore. And so, being able to if you go to NEA.org and look at our community schools model, I mean, how important it is for us to invest in the community schools concept that is supporting the entire community and meeting the needs of the whole student, and doing that needs assessment in that community to determine what are the resources that we need in this community to lift that community, because we're not just lifting the students, we're lifting the community as a whole. And so I think, when we look at our community schools model, that's one of the things that we need to be looking at, so that we're investing properly in the resources and needs of individual communities.
I love that you said community schools. That is so real and a practical solution. So yeah, you're right. Schools have been the hub of so many things: food insecurity, mental health services, information about where to get tested. I mean, these schools have been sending out that information. The more schools we can make community schools, the better our system is holistically.
That's right. And what I love about this conversation is that we're reimagining what our center of gravity is, so to speak, among communities, and centering it around school makes sense because we know that it is often the common denominator of determinant of success. And if we have equal quality education, I deeply believe that that is a racial social justice issue because you allow our students to level up. And so I love the fact that you guys are thinking audaciously. I think that we have to reimagine education. We have to imagine how we tackle housing, how we tackle equity in the workforce when it comes to salaries, everything. So this is a moment that I know that folks are having a hard time, but there's a very few moments in a generational's lifetime that we could reimagine what government looks like. And one of them has to be through education. I want to be mindful of our time, but so I want to ask you both, and I'll ask you first, Representative Gonzalez, what action can you leave for the few folks tuning in to do right now? What action?
Wow. I mean, this is going to sound super repetitive considering we're in a Voto Latino conversation, but the first thing I would say is
the vote.
I mean, the first thing I would say is to vote, right? Like to vote and get all of your friends and family to vote, even though like, obviously I think anybody who's watching this is like, oh, Voto Latino. Yeah, vote. But the other thing I would say is to really be cognizant. I did a speech the other day and virtually, of course, and I asked the people watching, raise your hand on Zoom if you feel democracy's in trouble. And everybody raised their hand. And that's scary because democracy is the foundation of who we are as a country, right? And so I would say for people to really pay attention to what's happening in at all levels of government, because right now we just need active, healthy participation in democracy. And it starts with voting, but it's voting plus is what I'm telling people. Absolutely.
Noel?
I mean, I think to add to that, it's important that we model civic engagement for our children. It's really important that when we go vote, that it's something that we're proud of, that we do publicly, and using all of our platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's just picking up your phone and sending a text to your neighbor, your cousin, your tío, your primas, have you voted? And taking pictures of yourself voting. I know something that my wife and I have done. My wife's also a teacher, and from the moment our kids could reach the voting booth, they've always been in there. My son would go with me. Our daughter would go with with my wife, and they would use the machine, and it was something that we do as a family. And just being able to model that engagement is really important because not only do they need to see us voting, but we also need to do our part to reach out to our family, friends, and neighbors and say, hey, have you voted yet? It's important because voter apathy is real, and sometimes folks feel like their vote doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Or their vote's not going to count. And it does. I mean, we have countless elections where we can point to where one vote, two votes. I mean, I know when I taught in the Sled Independent School District and we worked on school board elections, sometimes school board elections were decided by a handful of votes. So it's really important that not only do we go vote, but we do everything to connect people and give them the opportunity to vote and be public about it. It's important. It's important that we show that we voted. That I voted sticker is important. I had someone here send me from El Paso because I love that El Paso I voted sticker, the El Paso strong, and I was jealous. So I got on Facebook real quick and I said, hey, I need someone to send me one of those El Paso strong I voted stickers.
I love it.
But just something as simple as a sticker, and showing people and creating that excitement and how important it is to exercise our civic duty is important, and that's how we create a culture of voting. We create a culture of voting with our kids and with future generations, which is something that we always strive for as teachers. I always like to share real quick a story of my high school government teacher, Mr. Hunt. May he rest in peace. But if you were fortunate enough to be in his class as a senior in high school when you turned 18, you would walk in and on your desk you would find two things: a voter registration card and your favorite candy bar.
That's impressive, actually. That's very talk about catching your. I wouldn't call that a bribe, but that's really impressive to be so in tune with what your kids wanted.
Catches your attention. Chocolate. I love it. Chocolate catches my attention. I'm like, what? There's chocolate?
Always. I actually am suspicious of when someone tells me that they don't like chocolate. I'm like, I don't know if we could be relatable at all. So I want to be mindful, but I think there's a couple of things here that people. First of all, when people say that my vote doesn't matter, it's like it's the collective. I like to remind people that in 2018, for the very first time, Texas, first of all, went from the dead last voter registration state to 41st in a midterm election. And for the first time, Generation X, Y, and Z outvoted older voters. And what we brought into Congress is a Congress that looked like our country for the first time in 240 years. That's amazing. And they passed legislation that we believe in. But Texas, I want to, Papaya de Mariah basically really highlights something that I think most people don't realize, the power that Texas really has. How can a state like Texas implement more civic engagement education and anti-racism curriculum? And the reason, folks that are tuning in, that this is of particular importance to my heart is that Texas classrooms is one of the largest school-age children in the country. So just by sheer population size, they end up dictating what kids in Connecticut read, kids in Pennsylvania read, because they control the curriculum of what physically goes inside textbooks. So, Mary, answer that question. How can we educate more?
Best question ever. And I'm going to ask you who asked this question, please contact my office. Here's why. A year ago, El Paso experienced one of the most traumatic days of our community's history, the El Paso shooting. And as we reflect on why that happened, it happened because the young person who came to our community, who drove hundreds of miles to shoot Latinos, was because he hasn't been given the consciousness to combat racist rhetoric he had found on the internet. So he just internalized it. So here's what we need to do. We need to give young people the tools to understand civic engagement and anti-racism. So what we're doing as one of the bills in response to what happened in the shooting, this is my bill, so I would love everybody to come learn about it, is implementing anti-racism into our Texas state curriculum, because here's the truth. We live in a world in which social media dominates. And sadly, there is misinformation and people who are targeted on social media. And if we don't give young people the tools, how do we expect them to survive and navigate these realities? And so we are being intentional and strategic about giving them this, and we're putting it into the curriculum. And that is one way we can honor the lives that we've lost here in El Paso. And to that,
for us at Voto Latino, El Paso shooting was so personal for so many reasons, right? The playground where the Walmart where that happened, my kids had just had played that Sunday in that playground inside the mall, and it was all so real and so raw, but it was also so intentional. And with that, Representative Gonzalez, you really lift up one of the things that we're constantly doing at Voto Latino, which is really being a source of validated, vetted, real information. And so, Noel, I ask you, from Danny Turkel, is how can we effectively counter misinformation in our networks? What is it that we need to do?
I think this is why investing in education is so critical. So if teachers go to neaedjustice.org, we've got a lot of great resources for educators on exactly how to be able to have these conversations with our students. I was very privileged and very fortunate that when I taught at Cesar Chavez, I had my students for an hour and a half every day in every class, as opposed to my colleagues who had them for 45 minutes every day or an hour and a half every other day. So I had the privilege of being able to set aside the curriculum at times when there was something, a headline in the news about some issue in the community or one of their friends, to be able to have those real conversations with our students, about consequences, both positive and negative consequences, both in the short term and the long term. But being able to have that time, in our schools, to have those guided discussions and conversations and be able to thoughtfully take our students through that process is really important. And that's why, we're always advocating for the time that is really needed, to reach our students and give them the information that they need to be informed. right? To be able to determine the difference between propaganda and what's real, right? When they read something in the newspaper, just because it's in the newspaper and it's an opinion column, right? That doesn't mean it's factual just because it's in the paper. So, being able to have the time to take our students through all of these processes is really important. And that's something that we're always striving for as the NEA and in Texas, through the Texas State Teachers Association, is trying to put resources in the hands of our teachers and educators, because it doesn't always happen in the classroom, right? Sometimes, our support staff also have to be armed with this information, because sometimes conversations come up in the bus, or in the playground, or in the cafeteria, in the hallway. And so, all of our educators, all of our staff, need to be able to have the information to guide our students and guide our children, so that they can then in turn go back home, and be able to have these conversations. I can't tell you how many times our students would come back excited because they took something they learned in the classroom and were able to walk their parents through something, or through a piece in the paper, or the news that they heard that day or the day before, or their siblings. So it's really important that we utilize the systems that we have to give our teachers the tools that they need, to be able to have these guided conversations, especially right now around racial and social justice, that are so important and so critical, because all of the issues that we're talking about, they all come together in our classrooms, right? Whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's immigration, whether it's LGBTQ issues, just you name it. It's all going to come and meet in our classroom, because these are issues that are impacting all of our students, all of our families in our community, and so they all come together in our classroom. So we need to make sure that our teachers have the tools and resources to be able to have these important conversations with our youth.
Maria Teresa, can I just jump in on this really quickly?
Of course.
I think it's an important question. Why does misinformation exist? It exists because people are strategically putting it into our view, right? So we have to be strategic and intentional in challenging misinformation. Noel, you're exactly right. It starts in our classrooms. When I go speak at classes, I ask 5 questions. First question, because we're in El Paso and everybody in El Paso loves the Cowboys. I ask the kids, okay, kids, who are the Cowboys playing this weekend? And they all know, right? Because it's El Paso. The second question, I say, who is the governor of Texas? Maybe 1 or 2 know. Then I say, who's the lieutenant governor? Very, very few know. And I ask this question from 5th grade to college. And then I ask them, okay, who's the politically most powerful person in Texas? Noel, who would you answer?
Well, Lieutenant Governor.
You don't know yet? Oh, my internet might have froze. Anyways,
Noel said the lieutenant governor.
Oh, the lieutenant governor. Yes, lieutenant governor. Yes. And I say, okay, you know who the Cowboys are playing, but you don't know the most politically powerful person in Texas. Is it intentional or unintentional? And that is the beginning of planting the seeds that there are actually folks in society that don't want you to have all this information. And so we have to be strategic about breaking not only down the barriers of not having of misinformation, but also not even having any information, right? And so that is up to us as leaders, all of us on this Zoom, and those of you watching. How are we being thoughtful and forward thinking about challenging misinformation? Because those exist for a reason, and they are funded, and they are strategic and intentional. So let's be funded, strategic, and intentional on the other side of it.
Hear, hear. And with that, I want to thank both of you for joining us. If anybody has any question of what you missed, one is that we need you to vote. We need you to think audaciously and demand that the people that you elect are as audacious as you all. We need you to wear a mask, and we need you to vote early. Bring a snack, bring some water, bring your playlist, bring a battery pack, but make it fun. We are absolutely in the fight for our democracy, but the fact that so many millions of us know this means that we are the change we've been waiting for. I want to thank Mary Gonzalez for her leadership and for the example that you set every day. Noel for being a teacher, but also for speaking truth to the power and being a guiding light at the NEA. So thank you both of you for all the work. Gracias a Norberto and everyone at Voto Latino for the behind the scenes of putting this together. We are so, so grateful. Everyone, vote. Make a plan, text 73179 if you haven't done it already. If you can't vote, have someone do it for you. Have a proxy voter. We can't leave anybody on the sidelines this time. Thank you, everyone. Be well, be safe.
Thank you, Maria Teresa, for your leadership. Thank you all.
Gracias.
Gracias.